I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought we were doing great until the California topic came up. And the reason for that is when Walter O'Malley took the Dodgers out of Brooklyn and Horace Stoneham took the Giants out of New York City, I don't know anybody who would argue it was based upon just goodwill and good feeling. Those were two spectacular business decisions that transformed professional sports and also richly rewarded all of those players. I suspect that Willie Mays was doing a lot better in California than he was doing in New York City. I think that's a pretty plausible argument. But back to the original intent here. John Calipari had a great line recently. I know him, had great years at University of Massachusetts. He said he had just gotten used to managing parents. It looked as though he was going to have to start getting used in college basketball to managing grandparents. I think that's clear and consistent with the testimony that has been offered. So as Dr. Coates pointed out, the bidding war is always the same. It's about the fans. It's about the person who is selling peanuts and pennants outside of the ballpark. We all know better, but that's where the political argument always goes. Nothing to do with the luxury suites, nothing to do with the naming rights. But then again, the naming rights are only good for a period of time when the name is then taken off if there might be a better deal for sponsorship. Mr. Racho, you pointed out the frailty of what happens to these kids, and you're right on target. But the incentives are misplaced too, in terms of how the application plays out. So the American people, to their everlasting credit, have the highest tax compliance in the world. 86% of the American people, as Mr. Madden would point out from his IRS days, pay their taxes on time. And the reason for that is withholding. That's the genius of the withholding system. And that's why the problem that a lot of young athletes, it's not isolated from a lot of star entertainers. They have many of the same challenges. But Professor Coates, let me take this back to the point that I made at the beginning. Public financing of stadiums. We've seen it. There's the threat of moving, the chairman's right, and then they leave. They say they're going to leave, and in some cases they really do leave. And the sports fans, the loyal fans who show up week after week, sometimes day after day, they're left with a pretty implausible explanation. But you pointed out that private sports enterprises generally are a losing proposition for taxpayers and a winning proposition for the owners. Let me ask you this, and I assume your first preference is to end all of these subsidies, but assuming politically that that isn't possible, what should these localities be asking in return from these teams? How can state and local governments, who are really exposed for the success or the failure of the teams as they move around, draw some general benefit, if not specific?
Thank you for the question. And if I was God, I would probably have a decent answer, but I'm not. So I'll give you the best answer I can. And that is to hold the line. The problem really is that cities accept this bidding war process. All it takes is for the city managers to all say, no, we're not doing that, so that it stops. But everyone, this is a very standard sort of what's called a prisoner's dilemma situation, all it takes is one to violate that agreement to say no, and then the whole thing falls apart because that one that fails to say no gets a stadium or gets a team relocated. So it's a very, very difficult problem, but it's one that could be solved, I think, through agreement amongst state and local governments to not agree to subsidize stadiums. And to the extent that this is a possible thing for Congress to do, to make it impossible for state and local governments to compete in this way. Whether that is in fact constitutional, legal, I'm not a legal scholar, I'm not a constitutional scholar, I don't know, but I think that that would resolve this problem. Just take away the ability to allow teams to back up the Brinks truck to the local treasury.
So the witnesses, your testimony's really been great, all of you. So we're all very good at defining the problem onto trying to figure out the solution. Thank you.
Representative Richard Neal's line of questioning cuts straight to the heart of one of the most controversial issues in American sports economics. Why do billionaire-owned sports franchises so often receive public money to build stadiums, even when independent research repeatedly shows taxpayers rarely receive the promised economic benefits? Neal begins with a history lesson that immediately challenges a common narrative. He reminds everyone that when the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants moved to California in the late 1950s, those decisions weren't driven by loyalty, civic pride, or the interests of fans. They were business decisions, calculated moves designed to maximize revenue and increase franchise values. Those relocations helped transform professional sports into the financial powerhouse it is today.